Hello everybody, how you doing? Hope you're doing well. Oh, sorry, just got to get my cardigan all nice and comfy and not looking weird either. Comfortable and not looking weird is a bit of a challenge sometimes. Anyway, so today we have a new story. It is the third book in the Psammead series by Edith Nesbit. We have had the first two. The first one was, hang on, the Psammead. No, it was called Five Children and It. The It in the story is the Psammead. The second book was The Phoenix and the Carpet. Sorry, I'm having a bit of a hard time because I keep mixing up the titles between the different series. The other series that I seem to have no trouble remembering the names of, except I get them in the wrong order, is the Bastables, which is the story of the treasure seekers, the would-be goods, and new treasure seekers. Those three I have no trouble remembering for most of the time, except for just now when I was trying to. So now we're having another one from the Psammead series. It's the last one, the last book in the series. The Psammead. A Psammead in the stories is a sand fairy. Rather odd looking. It's got eyes on stalks, a little bit like a snail has, and a rather rotund, hairy, ape-like body, I think, and a tail, I'm not sure. And I'm trying to currently ascertain if there are actually pictures that go with the story, because I think there ought to be, and I think I might have found some that I can show you. Illustrations as the type of illustrations that were in the original one, because the ebook that I will be reading from doesn't actually really have, it's got 3 or 4 that are more sort of diagram-like. Not really the sort of thing I'm after. So anyway, we'll get there, and I will have to carry on looking and hope that I can find them in time for when we get to those chapters in the book. I've got one for the first chapter, and I'm now actually just gathering up the ones for the second chapter, because I seem to remember that in this book, in the books by this author, the chapters aren't necessarily as long as they are in some of the other books. So this is good, because now I've actually got the illustrations I was looking for. And I will get the ones for the third chapter, and then I shall tell you a little bit. I did a little bit last time, but also I'm having to look at my other monitor to see what I'm doing, otherwise I won't be able to actually get the pictures for you. Tell you a little bit about what's been going on, kind of, I suppose. And that will do. There you go. Now, go back to this page. Just the Wikipedia page about the story of the Amulet. The Story of the Amulet is a novel for children written in 1906. Now, the previous book, I think, was written in 1904, and the first one in the series was 1903. I'm not sure. Anyway, this one's written in 1906 by the English author Edith Nesbit. It's part of a trilogy of novels that also includes Five Children and It, 1902, and The Phoenix and the Carpet, 1904. Yay, got that one. In it, the children re-encounter the Psammead, the It, in Five Children and It. Well, I got that bit right too. And I won't read any more about the story because it'll give away the story itself, but I will read this from a snippet of a review or something. Gore Vidal writes, "It is a time machine story, only the device is not a machine but an Egyptian amulet whose other half is lost in the past. By saying certain powerful words, the amulet becomes a gate through which the children are able to visit the past or future. A story of considerable beauty." Now, I hope that hasn't spoiled the discoveries of the story too much for you. Anyway, I don't think it will. There's references to other things from within the story, such as there's a chapter called The Queen of London. It satirises certain things that were common beliefs at the time, stuff like that. But we're not going to go into those details. We will just read the story and enjoy it. I better give an introduction if there's anyone new here. Hi, I'm Jev. I read old-fashioned children's stories. Actually, no, I should say it more accurately. I read old children's stories. Children's stories that were written long ago. There you go. That's a better explanation of it. So I read these stories because a lot of these things are no longer available. You often cannot find them at your local library because libraries like books that are popular and new, preferably the intersection of both those things. And a lot of these stories are, because they've become unknown and they are old, they don't get issued often enough for the libraries to keep them in stock. In fact, a lot of them don't even keep them in their digital catalogues anymore because I guess they have to do a little bit of housekeeping to do with keeping things on their books, catalogue books, their computers, I should say. So how are you going to access these stories to enjoy them, to learn from them, to also discover some of the things that have become cultural references in our day and age? There are references from a lot of the different books we've read in the past, especially ones which are now considered classics like The Wind in the Willows, Alice in Wonderland, even ones like The Secret Garden. There are references that have become part of our cultural understanding or the way we see the world, or phrases we even use to explain things as a shorthand. And they have come from some element of a story or an observation that is made in one of these books. Sometimes that's how things become classics. It's just because they keep getting referenced in a way that makes a lot of sense. So if we don't have these easily available for us to read sitting in front of us, that we think to actually borrow them to read them, either from the standard library in a physical book or from their digital lendings, how are we going to get the experience? One way is through television series and movies, or web series even now, and movies. A lot of these stories have been made into those things, but they're usually also very old properties, these things that were made. When I say very old, nowhere near as old as the actual books because of the technology changes, but usually the more recent ones are sort of like the 1970s, which for a lot of you will be a very long time ago and before you were born even. Prehistoric. Shows you how old I am. Anyway, so you can find ways of seeing some of these because they are around. There are some of these stories that some of us did grow up seeing as well as actually reading. But a lot of them are actually available as public domain books, which means they're no longer in copyright. They're available. You can access them in their digital forms from places like Project Gutenberg, and I'm going to give you the link for that if you've only just arrived. Oopsie, I need to actually type that in the right place. So Project Gutenberg, they are a digital repository for books that are in the public domain. They are American public domain because different countries have different rules about how long a copyright lasts for. So English copyright is something to do with when it was first published or when the author died. Now, for most of the things that most people come across, and it's the longest date of those two, and I don't know what the one is to do with publishing, what the time period is. But the author's death one is 70 years after the author died. Then it goes into public domain, which means there's a whole lot of books I really, really, really want to read to you, but I can't because they're still copyright. But there are other ones that we can read. They are still available. So because they're available on Project Gutenberg, and the service that I am using to share this information with you is American-based, we go with that for the situation, because the authors I'm reading largely are not New Zealand authors, so therefore New Zealand copyright law, technically, as far as I know, doesn't actually apply in that situation. But in case you're wondering, there are other readers who also read public domain books, and I happen to be part of a group called Codex, which is a collective of public domain book readers, people who read out loud on Twitch. Some of them read in other places as well, like me, put their videos up in other places as well. But most of the books that the others are reading are books written for adults. I have specialised in reading books that are written for children. So if you enjoy reading old books, if you like having your mind expanded by other times and places, authors who come from other cultures than necessarily your own one, then please look at the links that are below the video window or on my that are on my About Me page on Twitch. If you're on YouTube, I will be adding that information over there somehow. I haven't yet figured out quite how I'm going to do that. Otherwise, if you're on YouTube, come across to my Twitch page. Even if you're not going to start listening to me reading to you on Twitch, if you come to my Twitch page, you will find on the About Me section, in there is all of the codex details. So there is a list with links of all the different readers that are in our group. So it's a great way to pick up on books that you otherwise miss out on. And because we are from all over the world, there's quite a strong possibility that you will, if you want to be on Twitch, you will actually be able to find one of the members of the Codex actually reading live while you're looking, while you're on Twitch. So that's a great way to catch up on some extra story time. But like I say, the majority of the books, sorry, I think I can hear my headphones. I'm just going to make sure that they're turned off. It's not my phone because my phone isn't online, although it does sound like it's making a sound. Oh, yes, there was a very slight sound coming from my headphones. Right, that should be a bit better. Adult books written for adults, the rest of the Codex readers. Some of them are also reading books that were originally written for children. And my specialty is reading for children. So that's who I am if you're new here. I do have 3 tips once again, for the new visitors, I do have 3 tips. The first tip is make sure you have something to drink handy. Always have water because it keeps your brain working well. But you can have another drink that you like as well. I'm not going to limit you. So I've got some coffee today. I do have coffee. This is the one that you'll normally see me drinking from, but I don't usually wave it around at the beginning when I'm giving you my 3 tips. Just because, I need to try and get this to come back into focus. There, here we go. Just because the other one is easier to wave around without worrying about it splashing everywhere. So tip 1 is make sure you have something to drink. Water and something else. Tip number 2 is snacks. Make sure you have snacks because story time is much more fun if you've got something to eat as well. And tip number 3 is somewhere comfortable to sit. Something comfortable to sit on. If it's cold weather where you are, a nice warm blanket or a rug or a dressing gown or warm fluffy socks and slippers or whatever it is you need. Doesn't actually really matter, but just get yourself comfortable because we are going to be reading, and we will be reading for probably about an hour, maybe an hour and a half. My live session will usually be about an hour and a half. So I'm just going to plug my phone in because I like having it handy, and hopefully it's not going to talk to me while we are reading. I don't really want it to be talking to me. Make sure, yes, it's on vibration, do not disturb, except for the alarm, and it shouldn't be going. And hopefully no one's going to phone me. Nearly there. I did actually get other things sorted, and my microphone is working. I have not been talking to you for 15 minutes with my microphone turned off, which has happened a few times now, just because there's a few more things for me to remember these days. So if you're looking, that little logo that, if you're on Twitch, that little logo that's down just past the chat box, that's the Codex logo with my name on it, because I'm part of the Codex. I'm looking for something, aren't I? I am looking for Twitch on my phone. Here we go. Twitch on my phone. And yes, it says I am live. Isn't that smart? Very clever little phone. Thank you, little phone. I'll just give it a pat on the head. Right, pop that out of the way. It's just sometimes it's easier to be aware of things if it's on a different screen to the one that you normally look at, just because it catches your attention. Right, what else? I'm going to give you the Codex link. There you go. So Codex has a Discord server. If you like talking about old books, we also talk about other things sometimes too. Do come and join us on Discord. So Twitch, which is where I live stream, YouTube, which is where I put my videos, my recorded live streams, edited so I don't have anything outside of the video, and Discord, which is kind of like an old-fashioned bulletin board but with a lot more functions, are all free services. Yes, you can do paid options, but you don't have to. So if you haven't been involved with any of them before, there you go. Sign up for them, stay in the loop, find out what's going on, get to know some other people who are readers, storytellers, that sort of thing. The Codex group are wonderful. There's such a wide range of experiences. There are voice actors. There are people who are people whose day job is actually reading books for Audible. There you go. Did you know that? Through the power of the internet, I kind of know somebody who reads books for a job, for their job on the internet. And then in their spare time, in their evenings, they read stories to us on Twitch. All sorts of things like that. So wide range of people from different countries, all over the place. One of them's in Japan, I'm in New Zealand, somebody is in England, there's others in the States, there's someone who I think is English but lives in the States. I don't know, there's a whole lot of different people. Really worth checking out, worth it. Anyway, so we've got, I've told you the different places. I've told you where to get books from. Did I give you a link for that? Project Gutenberg. How long ago did I give you a link for that? I think I just gave you a link for that. Yes, I did. The Codex. I've got that. I'll give you a welcome link. Here you go. There you go. So if you want to lurk, which is quite common when people are listening to stories, and if you are happy for me to know that you are lurking, that you are here, and happy for me to say hi to you, then type !lurk, L-U-R-K, no spaces, no capitals, and it'll just pop up with a little message acknowledging the fact that you're going to be lurking. So lurking in this context is sitting there, not engaging with the chat, but actually still being part of what's going on. And I can say hi to you if you actually say that you're lurking. It's nice to have somebody to say hi to you, especially if you're stuck at home with COVID or something like that. It's horrible when that happens, and I know quite a few people at the moment doing that. But it's nice to still have contact with people, to feel like there are other real people out there in the world who are aware of you. It's good. If you are someone who likes to actually get involved with chatting and things like that, then please chat in the chat box over here. This is one of the reasons why people actually come and be part of the live stream, is because they can type into the chat box there. It's not just me, you can do that too. Keep it family friendly. There are some fairly tight filters there, just for language and stuff like that, because we want the grannies and their kids and their grandkids that they're looking after to be able to have a little bit of somewhere safe online, so that they can learn that online isn't all bad. I'm happy with you using bad language on other streams, but because of the nature of the stream that we have here, I would like to keep it clean for them, so that they feel that they can come back. And if you need to swear, find somewhere else that's just outside of here, and then pop back in again after you've finished having a decent swear, and then it's all good. There was something else I was going to say about the type of stream that we've got. I'm trying to think of what it was. Looking across at the other monitor to see if that'll help me remember. Chatting. Yes, I obviously interrupt myself quite often. I'll often get lost in the middle of a sentence. I'll be reading a sentence to you. I will have my eyes on the words in that sentence, and halfway through the sentence, whoop, my brain is somewhere else. And it's lots of fun, actually, because then I have to try and remember what it was, where I got up to in the sentence. But usually the reason my brain has taken a grand leap sideways is because it's thought of something usually to do with the story. So often it's to do with some experience I've had, somewhere I've lived, people I've known, and sometimes there's a little wee story associated with that. Nothing to do with the actual story, but it's just triggered a memory. And so I will quite happily share those with you. Sometimes there will be a word that I'm not quite sure of. If I get the pronunciation of a word different to what you're used to, keep in mind that I come from New Zealand and I have an English New Zealand background. So if you come from North America, this is just the way I speak. So the accent you hear will be different, but also there are some words that we pronounce differently. You have to go with that. If it's a very specific word that you think I have learned while I've been reading as I was growing up, you're welcome to say how you think it's pronounced. I may remember, I may not. If I actually ask about a word that I'm not sure about, you're most welcome to look it up and type it in the chat box, and then I can share it with everybody. And then the people on YouTube can get a bit of an education too, because they're not going to see our chat box at all. They miss out. Oh well, maybe they can come over here sometime and actually just join in. So, with all of that talk, let's get on with reading. We are starting The Story of the Amulet by Edith Nesbit. And yay, I did actually remember to change what the go live notification was, so everybody would have actually heard the correct name for what we are going to be reading today, because sometimes I forget. I forgot to change it on my schedule. Oopsie. Oh dear. We will see what we will see. We'll see how we go. I just have to type something in the box, not for you guys, but for somebody else. Right, let's read. We are reading The Story of the Amulet by Edith Nesbit, E. Nesbit, she's usually titled as. The illustrations I'll be sharing with you are by H.R. Miller. I'll see if I can find what his name means. What it is. Harold Robert Miller. He was illustrating children's books from 1869. Well, no, he was alive. From 1869 to 1942. And he was Scottish, and he was a graphic artist and an illustrator, and he has illustrated a lot of different books. You'll possibly recognise the style of his illustrations. So let's get on with reading The Story of the Amulet by Edith Nesbit. The story... Whoopsie, just looking if there was any bit I missed while I'm turning these pages. Sometimes I like to leave it on the title page of the book before I get started so that you can actually hear the extra bit of information. I will read out the dedication to Dr. Wallace Budge, B-U-D-G-E, of the British Museum, as a small token of gratitude for his unfailing kindness and help in the making of it. There is a slight story behind that, not a lot of detail. I'll just see if I can find that piece of information. No, I can't. So the author actually spent quite a lot of time researching the background of this story so that the places she was describing, the people that she was describing, the cultures and times that she was describing were, for the time being, for the time it was written, for the understanding that they had, reasonably accurate. So Dr. Wallace Budge was one of her go-to people, one of the biggest go-to people for her, for getting information to do with the background on the story. So let's get on with it. The Story of the Amulet by Edith Nesbit, Chapter 1, The Psammead. There were once 4 children who spent their summer holidays in a white house, happily situated between a sand pit and a chalk pit. Yes, these do exist. A sand pit in this context is a place where you quarry sand. You dig sand out of the ground to use for various purposes like building. Where I live in New Zealand, we don't usually get it from the ground, we usually get it from the sea. But these sort of places in England were once under the sea. That's why the sand is there. And it is near where there is chalk, if it's in the South Downs or the North Downs in southern England. The sand, the Green Sand Way, is a trail, a walking track that you can follow. And then you've got the North Downs and the South Downs are both chalk hillsides. And it's from land that has been pushed up from underneath the sea thousands and thousands of years ago, and then had parts of it worn away to expose these edges. So the house that she's talking about here was built between these two things, so that we know it was in the North or the South Downs of southern England. We'll carry on. So there were once 4 children who spent their summer holidays in a white house happily situated between a sandpit and a chalk pit. One day they had the good fortune to find in the sandpit a strange creature. Its eyes were on long horns, like snails' eyes, and it could move them in and out, like telescopes. It had ears, like a bat's ears, and its tubby body was shaped like a spider's, rounded, and covered with thick, soft fur, and it had hands and feet like a monkey's. It told the children, whose names were Cyril, Robert, Anthea, and Jane, that it was a Psammead, and that's spelt P-S-A-M-M-E-A-D, or sand fairy. And then she's got written here, Psammead is pronounced Sammy-id. There you go. It was very old. It was old, and its birthday was almost at the very beginning of everything. And it had been buried in sand for thousands of years, but it still kept its fairy-likeness, and part of this fairy-likeness was its power to give people whatever they wished for. You know, fairies have always been able to do this. Cyril, Robert, Anthea, and Jane now found their wishes come true, but somehow they could never think of just the right things to wish for, and their wishes sometimes turned out very oddly indeed. Yes, our first book is full of all these things that they had wished for without actually stopping to think, what happens if this is happening in real life? It's not quite the way I imagined, because they were not specific enough. And also sometimes you just can't anticipate what it's going to be like. Anyway, turned out very oddly indeed. In the end, their unwise wishes landed them in what Robert called a very tight place indeed. And the Psammead consented to help them out of the situation in return for their promise never to ask it to grant them any more wishes, and never to tell anyone about it, because it did not want to be bothered to give wishes to anyone ever anymore. At the moment of parting, Jane said politely, "I wish we were going to see you again some day," and the Psammead, touched by this friendly thought, granted the wish. The book is all about all of this. It's called 5 Children and It, and it ends up in the most tiresome way by saying the children did see the Psammead again, but it was not in the sandpit. It was, but I must say no more. So she recognises that is such a frustrating end to a story. The reason that nothing more could be said was that I had not then been able to find out exactly when and where the children met the Psammead again. Of course, I knew they would meet it because it was a beast. It was a beast of its word, and when it said a thing would happen, that thing happened without fail. How different from the people who tell us about what weather is going to be on Thursday next in London, the South Coast, and the Channel. They say these things on the weather reports. That was English places for the English radio stations broadcasting the weather forecast, and often it doesn't turn out quite like that, does it? Does the weather happen like that where you live, where the weather forecasters say, "Oh, it's going to be a nice sunny day today," and they'll be standing there and pointing to this chart. "We're going to have this weather here and this weather here and this weather here," and all this sort of stuff. They actually do it in a similar manner to me with the picture behind me, because what's actually behind me is a green screen, and that's what they do when you're looking at the weather forecast often. So they'll be telling you what the weather is going to be for the day, for tomorrow, and then you get up in the morning and you look out the window and you go, okay, well, I'm not so sure about that. They did say it was going to be nice, but it doesn't really look like that. But I'm going to go by what the weather report was and wear my summer dress, my summer sandals, and my sun hat. And you get out there, and the first part of the day is okay, and then you get out there at lunchtime, and it's bucketing down with rain, and it's howling a gale, and it's freezing cold. And so, yeah, they say these things, but it doesn't happen. But the Psammead's not like that. He says something, and it's going to happen. So there you go. That's what all that was about. I had not been able to find out exactly when and where the children met the Psammead again. Of course, I knew they would meet it, because it was a beast of its word, and when it said a thing would happen, that thing happened without fail. How different from the people who tell us about what weather it is going to be on Thursday next in London, the South Coast and Channel. The summer holidays during which the Psammead had been found and the wishes given had been wonderful holidays in the country. And the children had the highest hopes of just such another holiday for the next summer. The winter holidays were beguiled by the wonderful happenings of the Phoenix and the carpet. Hi, good to see you here. The wonderful happenings of the Phoenix and the carpet, which is the previous book that I have read in this series, which if you want to have a listen to that, go to my YouTube channel. Actually, I'll give you the link for that. I'll give you the link. Here's the link. YouTube. There it is. If you go to my YouTube channel and go to the playlists page, on there will be a playlist with all of the stories that I recorded, all of the readings I recorded for the Phoenix and the carpet. And if you missed the first one, 5 children in it, that one's there as well. So have a look if you want to in your own time. But if you want some background to this story, that's the way to go. Anyway, here we go. So winter muting, which some of you will see the name of in the chat over there, I'm pretty sure is part of our Codex group. So there you go. I was listening to them reading earlier on today. Probably yesterday for them. It was this morning for me. Anyway, we'll carry on reading. So say hi to each other. Chat away to each other while I'm reading. No problem. Where am I up to? I told you I got lost, didn't I? So we've talked about the Phoenix and the carpet. Okay, the winter holidays were beguiled by the wonderful happenings of the Phoenix and the carpet, and the loss of these 2 treasures, the Phoenix and the carpet, I think, would have left the children in despair, because at the end of that story, the Phoenix decided he'd had enough. He wanted a nice peaceful time, which is a little bit like the Psammead did. Yep. Lurk away, go for it. That's wonderful. You've got coffee and stuff. That's brilliant. Good to see you here. It's lovely to actually have other readers around. Wonderful. It really is. So back to the story part of it. Sorry. Yes, I've got peanuts. I forgot to tell everybody I've got some peanuts to eat. I did bring snacks. Sometimes I forget. And yeah, ADHD, so my brain bounces around everywhere. I'll engage with chat, and then I'll also be talking about what I'm reading and some other thing I've thought of. So here we go. The 2 treasures. The Phoenix had decided it needed a holiday because it wasn't used to living the way the children did in the story, which it considered to be very modern children, which was a busy, busy life. That where it had come from, the Phoenix, it had been an honoured being, and so therefore there was not a lot of demand on it. And the carpet was a wishing carpet, so they had wishes, but this time they were wishes that were granted by the carpet that the Phoenix was friends with. I don't quite get how that works, but that's how it worked. And the carpet actually got worn out, so in the end they had to say goodbye to the carpet and to the Phoenix, and so it would have been a great loss for them at the end of their winter, and would have left the children in despair. I found out where I got up to, but for the splendid hope of their next holiday in the country. The world, they felt, and indeed had some reason to feel, was full of wonderful things, and they were really the sort of people that wonderful things did happen to. So they looked forward to the summer holiday, but when it came, everything was different and very, very horrid Father had to go to Manchuria to telegraph news about the war to the tiresome paper he wrote for, the Daily Bellower. That's a weird name for a newspaper. Or something like that was its name. And Mother, poor dear Mother, was away in Madeira because she had been very ill. Madeira is one of those places that people would be sent to recuperate when they just needed fresh air and a little bit of gentle sunshine around them, the warmth so their body's not working hard to warm up, without any stress, probably staying in a guest house, meals provided, not having to worry about the children or doing the dishes, because often that can be quite stressful. And so the children are not with father or mother. So Manchuria was a part of China that was being run as a puppet state by part of Japan, I think, and there had been a war there, and I'm not too sure if it had anything to do with the English pulling out of that part of China or not, but you can look it up if you want to know. I do know that the land mass that Manchuria was part of was in China. So there you go. Mother, poor dear Mother, was away in Madeira because she had been very ill, and the lamb, I mean the baby, was with her. So there are 5 children in the family, but we mainly only hear about 4 because the lamb is the youngest, quite a lot younger, involved with some of the various adventures that they had, but not central to them the same way, except for one particular chapter where the lamb there were some people who wanted to kidnap him. So for some reason the children always call him the lamb. The children each have nicknames. We'll probably get to them along the way. The baby was with Mother, and Aunt Emma, who was Mother's sister, had suddenly married Uncle Reginald, who was Father's brother. And they had gone to China, which is much too far off for you to expect to be asked to spend the holidays. So maybe it was one of those aunt or uncles whose house they'd stayed at in the summer. Probably. Much too far off for you to expect to be asked to spend the holidays in, however fond your aunt and uncle may be of you. So the children were left in the care of old Nurse, who lived in Fitzroy Street near the British Museum in London. And though she was always very kind to them, and indeed spoiled them far more than would be good for the most grown-up of us, the 4 children felt perfectly wretched, and when the cab had driven off with Father and all his boxes and guns and the sheepskin with blankets and the aluminium mess kit inside it, that's for cooking, the stoutest heart quailed, and the children and the girls broke down altogether and sobbed in each other's arms, while the boys each looked out of one of the long gloomy windows of the parlour and tried to pretend that no boy could be such a muff as to cry. Yes, you will come across some rather archaic attitudes, especially gender role type attitudes, although sometimes some of our authors do challenge those a little. They'll go along with them and then just put a little twist in somehow for our characters. So we'll see how we go with this. I hope you noticed that they were not cowardly enough to cry till their father had gone. I don't actually really care about that, but that's the way the story was told at the time for the children of the time. Father knew he had quite they knew he had quite enough to upset him without that. They don't want Dad getting worried about them because they're so upset because he's leaving. But when he had gone, everyone felt as if it had been trying. It being girls and the boys, had felt as if it had been trying not to cry all its life, and that it must cry now if it died for it. So they cried. Tea with shrimps and watercress cheered them a little. The watercress was arranged in a hedge around a fat glass salt cellar, a tasteful device that they had never seen before. But it was not a cheerful meal. So shrimps would have been a little bit of a luxury for the children, not a common seafood for them to have eaten. It was probably something that Nurse had done to cheer them up a bit, or had her cook do. After tea, Anthea went up to the room that had been Father's, and when she saw how dreadfully he wasn't there, and remembered how every minute was taking him further and further from her, and nearer to the guns of the Russians, oh, that's the war. Okay. She cried a little more. Then she thought of Mother, ill and alone, and perhaps at that very moment wanting a little girl to put eau de cologne on her head, because it was something that would help with soothing. It's cooling. It's got a very fresh, crisp sort of a smell that is not florally like most fragrances and stuff like that, and it was often used as a soothing sort of a thing. Just looking up Manchuria for you. Yes, Manchuria is the far northeastern corner of the landmass that makes up China, and it backs onto Russia, Far Eastern Russia. There you go. Manchuria is an exonym for a historical and geographic region of Russia and China in Northeast Asia, mostly in Northeast China today. So there you go. Come here and learn things. Don't just listen to stories. I'm just wondering if it's got anything about this war. How intriguing. I do know that at one stage it was a puppet state. Manchukuo was one of the names for it. I refer to it as puppet state because it was China, but that area was under the rulership of Japan, and they had, I think, Chinese people ruling it, but they were doing what they were told from the Japanese, is the way of explaining it at the time. Just seeing if I can find any reference to Russia here. No, not at the moment. Oh well, I might look it up some other time and we'll see what we can find out, and if it's even relevant. Doesn't matter. Not for us, because it's probably just the fact that Father is so very far away, basically on the other side of the world, but still in the Northern Hemisphere, in a place where English is not the main language that's being spoken around him, except for when he's with other military personnel, and where there is war going on, so there is quite a lot of risk, and they would be worried. Mother, I'm guessing, was already away, otherwise she would be even more worried and get more ill. So Mother is up there. No, not Mother, because I just said Mother. Anthea is up in Father's room and being very aware of the fact that he is such a long way away at war with the Russians, and Mother is away, and she's wondering if Mother is missing her. There you go. So wondering if at every moment Mother was wanting a little girl to put eau de cologne on her head and make her sudden cups of tea, and she cried more than ever. And then she remembered what Mother had said the night before she went away about Anthea being the eldest girl and about trying to make the others happy and things like that. So she stopped crying and thought instead. And when she had thought as long as she could bear, she washed her face and combed her hair and went down to the others, trying her best to look as though crying were an exercise she had never even heard of. She found the parlour in deepest gloom, hardly relieved at all by the efforts of Robert, who, to make the time pass, was pulling Jane's hair, not hard, but just enough to tease. Sorry, peanuts, snacks. "Look here," said Anthea, "let's have a palaver." Discussion. This word dated from the awful day when Cyril had carelessly wished that there had been Red Indians in England. First book. And there had been. The word brought back memories of last summer holidays, and everyone groaned. They thought of the White House with the beautiful tangled garden, late roses, asters, their type of fluffy daisy flower, but bigger, marigolds, sweet mignonette, which is another type of daisy, I think, something grown for the smell, I suppose, and feathery asparagus. So this is asparagus after it's done the stage that you cut it for eating. It actually grows out as a fern, and so it's all feathery. And if you want to be growing it in your vegetable garden, you need to let it grow as a fern for part of the time too, because then it puts nutrients back into the roots to grow more of the edible part. Of the wilderness which someone had once meant to make into an orchard, but which was now, as father said, 5 acres of thistles haunted by the ghosts of baby cherry trees. They thought of the view across the valley where the lime kilns looked like Aladdin's palaces in the sunshine, and they thought of their own sand pit with its fringe of yellowy grasses and pale, stringy-stalked wild flowers, and the little holes in the cliff that were the little sand martins' little front doors. Sand martins are a type of bird that burrow into the sand around the sides of the sand quarry. And they thought of the free, fresh air smelling of thyme and sweetbriar, and the scent of the wood smoke from the cottages in the lane, and they looked around old nurse's stuffy parlour, and Jane said, "Oh, how different it all is." It was. Old nurse had been in the habit of letting lodgings till father gave her the children to take care of, and her rooms were furnished, quote, "for letting." Now, it is a very odd thing that no one ever seems to furnish a room for letting in a bit the same way as they would furnish it for living in. This room had heavy dark red stuff curtains, stuff being a name used for curtain material, I suppose. The colour that blood would not make a stain on. Why would you choose that for your curtains? I don't know, but apparently it was common for if you were going to let your rooms, rent them out. With coarse lace curtains inside, the carpet was yellow and violet, with bits of grey and brown oilcloth in odd places. Strange. The fireplace had shavings and tinsel in it, so you were not to light a fire in it. It had wood shavings and tinsel to make it kind of look like an ornamental fire, not a real fire. Strange. Anyway, there was a very varnished mahogany chiffonier or sideboard with a lock that wouldn't act. There were hard chairs, far too many of them, with crochet antimacassas slipping off their seats, all of which sloped the wrong way, so you always slid off the seats. The table wore a cloth of a cruel green colour, with a yellow chain-stitch pattern round it. This is a very uncomfortable room, very not pleasant to be in. Over the fireplace was a looking glass that made you look much uglier than you really were, however plain you might be to begin with. Then there was a mantel board with maroon plush and wool fringe that did not match the plush. A dreary clock like a black marble tomb. It was silent as the grave too, for it had long since forgotten how to tick, and there were painted glass vases that never had any flowers in, and a painted tambourine that nobody ever played, and painted brackets with nothing on them. And then there's a quote, "and maple-framed engravings of the Queen, the Houses of Parliament, the plains of heaven, and of a blunt-nosed woodsman's flat return." I have no idea what that came from, but it's a description about the same sort of room. The furnishings. There were 2 books, last December's Bradshaw, and an odd volume of Plumridge's Commentary on Thessalonians. Normally that sort of thing you have as part of a set, so it's an odd one to have there on its own. There were, but I cannot dwell longer on this painful picture. It was indeed, as Jane said, very different. Now, I am going to back up slightly and say, what is an antimacasa? Do you know? I shall tell you. An antimacasa is a crocheted, sometimes it's fabric with crochet around the edge, cover that you put often on a chair back, an upholstered chair back, to stop hair oil, macassa oil, from destroying the upholstery on the chair. So an antimacasa was something where the fabric was going to soak up this oil from the men's hair oil and stop it from wrecking the furniture, But they became so common in the Victorian period, which obviously Victorian men used a lot of Macasa oil on their hair, which you can also look up. And so just those sort of things in general were called antimacassas. So she's just talked about them being on the seats of the chairs, probably for the same reason, to stop them getting worn out, but not for the same reason because you don't usually put Macasa hair oil on your seat of your chair. So the actual term came to mean any of those fabric, specifically crocheted usually, covers that were put on furniture to preserve it, even if it wasn't specifically for hair oil. Weird, isn't it? Funny how some words can go from being specific to a particular usage to actually becoming a general usage thing and a shorthand for that type of thing. So examples of that would be Hoover. Hoover is a brand name, and in England, people would talk, when we were living over there, they would talk about hoovering, which means doing the vacuuming, using the vacuum cleaner to get the dust out of the carpet and dirt off the floor. But they used the brand name for a very common and yet also quite desirable type of vacuum cleaner. So instead of talking about doing the vacuum cleaning, they would talk about hoovering. There you go. There's a lot of words that we have like that. In America, they talk about Kleenex. Would you like some? Do you need a Kleenex? Kleenex is a brand name for a type of facial tissue, which is the probably more correct proper name for the things that you use for blowing your nose that are disposable. There you go. But the Americans call them Kleenex as a general thing, not this. I mean, you can have a brand of some no-name thing from your local corner store, and it's still referred to as, do you need a Kleenex? They don't mean the actual brand, they actually mean the item. So there are a lot of words in English that come from a specific thing that become a general usage word. And you'd probably be surprised at how many of them you actually know. And I'm not going to try and list them for you, but we'll get on with the story anyway. We've had enough of that aside. So Antimacasa we've done. It was indeed, as Jane said, very different, this room. Let's have a palaver, said Anthea again. What about? Said Cyril, yawning. There's nothing to have anything about, said Robert, kicking the leg of the table miserably. I don't want to play, said Jane, and her tone was grumpy. She's the youngest of the four of them. Anthea tried very hard not to be cross. She succeeded. Look here, she said. Don't think I want to be preachy or a beast in any way, but I want to, what Father calls, define the situation. Do you agree? Fire ahead, said Cyril, without enthusiasm. He's the other one. Cyril and Anthea are the two oldest. Now, I can't remember at the moment which of the two is the oldest, which doesn't actually matter, but that's why there's a slight difference in attitude between those and Robert and Jane, just because of the age difference. There were often a lot of expectations on oldest children in a family, because of the fact that they were oldest. Sometimes there were different ones again, depending on whether the oldest was a girl or whether the oldest was a boy. Expectations were quite different then to what they are now. Fire ahead, said Cyril, without enthusiasm. Well then, we all know the reason we're staying here is because Nurse couldn't leave her house on account of the poor learned gentleman on the top floor, and there was no one else Father could entrust to take care of us. And, you know, it's taken a lot of money, Mother's going to Madeira, to be made well. So there's not a lot of places they could have gone to stay that Father and Mother would have had to pay for. There you go. Jane sniffed miserably. Yes, I know, said Anthea in a hurry, but don't let's think about how horrid it all is. I mean, we can't go to things that cost a lot, but we must do something. And I know there are heaps of things you can see in London without paying for them, and I thought we'd go and see them. We are all quite old now, and we haven't got the lamb, meaning we don't have to look after the infant. Jane sniffed harder than before. I mean, no one can say no because of him, dear pet. And I thought we must get nurse to see quite how old we are and let us go out by ourselves, or else we shall never have any sort of a time at all. And I vote we see everything there is. And let's begin by asking nurse to give us some bits of bread, and we'll go to St. James's Park. There are ducks there, I know. We can feed them. Only we must make nurse let us go by ourselves. Hurrah for liberty, said Robert, but she won't. Yes, she will, said Jane unexpectedly. I thought about that this morning and I asked Father and he said yes. So this is obviously just before Father left. And he said yes, and what's more, he told old nurse that we might. Only he said we must always say where we wanted to go, and if it was right, she would let us. 3 cheers for thoughtful Jane, cried Cyril, now roused at last from his yawning despair. I say, let's go now. So they went, old nurse only begging them to be careful of crossings and to ask a policeman to assist in the more difficult cases of crossing the road, because they had policemen, what they called beat policemen. So they were policemen who usually wore a helmet, policeman's helmet, and they walked a beat. And so it was common in London to actually see these policemen around the place. Partly it's a reassurance thing for the members of the public, and partly it's just helping people to make the right choices because they know they would be seen and dealt with by a member of the law enforcement, because the policeman is there. So here we go. And so ask a policeman to assist with the more difficult cases, the more difficult crossings, because a policeman can blow his whistle, hold his hand up, and the traffic has to stop. That's how it was. But they were used to crossings, for they had lived in Camden Town and knew the Kentish Town Road, where the trams rush up and down like mad at all hours of day and night, and seem as though, if anything, they would rather run over you than not. So they were actually quite used to traffic. These places are real places, Camden Town, Kentish Town Road. You can look them up on the London maps. They had promised to be home by dark, but it was July, so dark would be very late indeed, because that's summer for them. And long past bedtime. Ooh, they'd promised to be home by dark, and dark is after their normal bedtime. Such potential. They started to walk to St. James Park, and all their pockets were stuffed with bits of bread and the crusts of toast to feed the ducks with. They started, I repeat, but they never got there. And I think, to quote a favourite movie of my family's, here's where the story really begins. Between Fitzroy Street and St. James Park, there are a great many streets, and if you go the right way, you will pass a great many shops that you cannot possibly help stopping to look at. The children stopped to look at several with gold lace and beads and pictures and jewellery and dresses and hats and oysters and lobsters in their windows, and their sorrow did not seem nearly so impossible to bear as it had done in the best parlour at number 300 Fitzroy Street, which I don't know if it's a real place or not, but you can look it up. Presently, by some wonderful chance turn of Robert's, who had been voted captain because the girls thought it would be good for him, and indeed he thought so himself, and of course Cyril couldn't vote against him because it would have looked like a mean jealousy, they came into the little interesting criss-crossy streets that held the most interesting shops of all, the shops where live things were sold. Sorry, I'm just trying to... Live things were sold. There was one shop window entirely filled with cages and all sorts of beautiful birds in them. The children were delighted till they remembered how they had once wished for wings themselves and had had them, and then they felt how desperately unhappy anything with wings must be if it is shut up in a cage and not allowed to fly. And if you want to actually hear about that, go and listen to 5 Children and It. I'm pretty sure that's the playlist that it's in. YouTube channel, 5 Children and It. I think it's listed as Bastable's 1 as the book before I put the 5 Children in It title, so you can search for either. and you'll find it. But listen through there and you'll discover the children's adventure with having wished for wings and how they first discover that there are consequences to wishing for things. It was quite intriguing. It must be fairly beastly to be a bird in a cage, said Cyril. Come on. Sorry. They went on, and Cyril tried to think out a scheme for making his fortune as a gold digger at Klondike, the place, and then buying all the caged birds in the world and setting them free. Then they came to a shop that sold cats, but the cats were in cages, and the children could not help wishing someone would buy all the cages and put them on hearth rugs, which are the proper places for cats. And there was the dog shop, and there was not a happy thing to look at either. That was not a happy thing to look at either. Sorry, I lost it then. Because all the dogs were chained or caged, and all the dogs, big and little, looked at the four children with sad, wistful eyes, and wagged beseeching tails as if they were trying to say, buy me, buy me, buy me, and let me go for a walk with you. Oh, do buy me, and buy my poor brothers too. Do. They almost said do, plain to the ear as they whined, all but one big Irish terrier, and he growled when Jane patted him. Grrr, he seemed to say, as he looked at them from the back corner of his eye, so he's looking at them like this. I shall die chained up. No, I missed a bit. From the back corner of his eye, you won't buy me, nobody will. Ever. I shall die chained up, and I don't know that I care how soon it is either. I don't know that the children would have understood all this, only once they had been in a besieged castle, so they knew how hateful it is to be kept in when you want to get out. So they recognise it in other beings. Of course, they could not buy any of the dogs. They did indeed ask the price of the very, very smallest, and it was £65. That's a lot in 1904. But that was because it was a Japanese toy spaniel like the Queen once had her portrait with when she was only Princess of Wales. But the children thought if the smallest was all that money, the biggest would run into thousands. So they went on. And they did not stop at any more cat or dog or bird shops, but passed them by, and at last they came to a shop that seemed as though it only sold creatures that did not much mind where they were, such as goldfish and white mice, and sea anemones, and other aquarium beasts, and lizards, and toads, and hedgehogs, and tortoises, and tame rabbits, and guinea pigs, and there they stopped for a long time, and fed the guinea pigs with bits of bread through the cage bars, and wondered whether it would be possible to keep a sandy-coloured double lop, that's a type of rabbit, in the basement of the house in Fitzroy Street. And just a wee tip, if you have a guinea pig, don't feed it bread. That's not what their stomach is designed for. Do look it up, find out the right food for them. But back in this day and age, people had a completely different idea of what you could feed animals. I don't suppose old Nurse would mind very much, said Jane. Rabbits are most awfully tame sometimes. I expect it would know her voice and follow her all about. She'd tumble over it 20 times a day, said Cyril. Now a snake. There aren't any snakes, said Robert hastily. And besides, I never could cotton to snakes, somehow. I wonder why. Worms are as bad, said Anthea, and eels and slugs. I think it's because we don't like things that haven't got legs. Father says snakes have got legs hidden away inside of them, said Robert. Yes, and he says we've got tails hidden away inside us, but it doesn't either of it come to anything really, said Anthea. I hate things that haven't any legs. It's worse when they have too many, said Jane with a shudder. Think of centipedes. They stood there on the pavement, a cause of some inconvenience to the passers-by, and thus beguiled the time with conversation. Cyril was leaning his elbow on the top of a hutch that had seemed empty when they had inspected the whole edifice of hutches one by one, and he was trying to reawaken the interest of a hedgehog that had curled itself into a ball earlier in the interview, when a small soft voice just below his elbow said quietly, plainly, and quite unmistakably, not in any squeak or whine that had to be translated, but in downright common English, "Buy me, do, please buy me." Cyril started as though he had been pinched and jumped a yard away from the hutch. "Come back, oh, come back," said the voice, rather louder but still softly. "Stoop down and pretend to be tying up your bootlace. I see it's undone, as usual." Cyril mechanically obeyed. He knelt on one knee on the dry, dusty pavement, peered into the darkness of the hutch, and found himself face to face with the Psammead. It seemed much thinner than when he had last seen it. It was dusty and dirty, and its fur was untidy and ragged, and its long snail's eyes were drawn in quite tight, so they hardly showed at all, so they were up close here instead of way out there. "Listen," said the Psammead in a voice that sounded as though it would begin to cry in a minute. "I don't think the creature who keeps the shop will ask a very high price for me. I've bitten him more than once, and I've made myself look as common as I can. He's never had a glance from my beautiful, beautiful eyes. Tell the others I'm here, but tell them to look at some of those low common beasts while I'm talking to you. The creature inside mustn't think you care much about me, or he'll put a price upon me far, far beyond your means." That's fairly strategic, yes. "I remember in the dear old days last summer you never had much money. Oh, I never thought I should be glad to see you. I never did." It sniffed and shot out its long snail's eyes, expressly to drop a tear well away from its fur. It doesn't like being wet. "Tell the others I'm here, and then I'll tell you exactly what to do about buying me." Cyril tied his bootlace into a hard knot to stop it coming undone. It's probably like a double bow. Stood up and addressed the others in firm tones. "Look here," he said, "I'm not kidding, and I appeal to your honour," an appeal which in this family was never made in vain. "Don't look at that hutch, look at the white rat. Now, you are not to look at that hutch, whatever I say." He stood in front of it to prevent mistakes. "Now get yourselves ready for a great surprise. In that hutch there is an old friend of ours. Don't look. Yes, it's the Psammead, the good old Psammead. It wants us to buy it. It says you're not to look at it. Look at the white rat and count your money. Oh, on your honour, don't look." The others responded nobly. They looked at the white rat till they quite stared him out of countenance, and so he went and sat up on his hind legs in a far corner and hid his eyes with his front paws and pretended he was washing his face. Cyril stooped again, busying himself with the other bootlace, and listened for the Psammead's further instructions. "Go in," said the Psammead, "and ask the price of lots of other things. Then say, 'What do you want for that monkey that's lost its tail, the mangy old thing in the third hutch from the end?' Oh, don't mind my feelings. Call me a mangy monkey. I've tried hard enough to look like one. I don't think he'll put a high price on me. I've bitten him 11 times since I came here the day before yesterday. If he names a bigger price than you can afford, say you wish you had the monkey." "But you can't give us wishes. I've promised never to have another wish from you," said the bewildered Cyril. "Don't be a silly little idiot," said the Psammead, the sand fairy, in trembling but affectionate tones. "But find out how much money you've got between you and do exactly what I tell you." So the Psammead actually understands some aspects. He understood what was likely to happen when the children wished for certain things that they hadn't actually figured out for themselves. So the Psammead's quite clever. It's worth in this situation for them to listen to him. Cyril, pointing a stiff and unmeaning finger at the white rat so as to pretend that its charms alone employed his tongue, explained matters to the others while the Psammead hunched himself and bunched himself and did its very best to make itself look uninteresting. Then the 4 children filed into the shop. "How much do you want for that white rat?" asked Cyril. 8p was the answer. "And the guinea pigs?" 18p to 5 bob, according to the breed. "And the lizards?" 9p each. "And toads?" 4pence. Now look here, said the greasy owner of all this caged life with a sudden ferocity which made the whole party back hurriedly onto the wainscoting of hutches. Wainscoting is the lining that's on the wall that goes up to a certain height, and in houses it went up to that height to stop damage to the plaster of the upper part of the wall that was often painted or had paper on it. Damage from chairs being pushed back and broom handles and things like this. So when she talks here about the wainscoting of hutches, she's talking about that the hutches are stacked up so that they form like a wall up to a certain height, this barrier. Made the whole party back hurriedly onto the wainscoting of hutches with which the shop was lined. Look-ye here. I ain't a-going to have you a-coming in here and a-turning the whole place out of window and pricing every animal in the stock just for your lark, so don't think it. If you're a buyer, be a buyer. But I never had a customer yet as wanted to buy mice and lizards and toads and guineas all at once, so how't you goes? Oh, wait a minute, said the wretched Cyril, feeling how foolishly yet well-meaningly he had carried out the Psammead's instructions. Just tell me one thing. What do you want for the mangy old monkey in the third hutch from the end? The shopman only saw in this a new insult. Mangy young monkey yourself, said he. Get along with you, bloomin' cheek. Hout you goes. Oh, don't be so cross, said Jane, losing her head altogether. Don't you see he really does want to know that? How does he indeed, sneered the merchant. Then he scratched his ear suspiciously, for he was a sharp businessman, and he knew the ring of truth when he heard it. His hand was bandaged, and 3 minutes before he would have been glad to sell the mangy old monkey for 10 shillings. Now, how he does he? Said. Then £2.10's my price. He's not got his fellow that monkey ain't, nor yet as match. Not this side of the equator where he comes from, and the only one ever seen in London. Ought to be in London Zoo. £2.10, down on the nail, but hout you goes. The children looked at each other. 23 shillings and 5pence was all they had in the world, and it would have been merely 3 and 5pence, but for the sovereign which father had given them, between them, at parting, as a gift. We've only 23 shillings and 5pence, said Cyril, rattling the money in his pocket. 23 farthings in somebody's own cheek, said the dealer, for he did not believe that Cyril had so much money. There was a miserable pause. Then Anthea remembered and said, Oh, I wish I had £2.10. So do I, miss, I'm sure, said the man with bitter politeness. I wish you had, I'm sure. Anthea's hand was on the counter. Something seemed to slide under it. She lifted it. There lay 5 bright half-sovereigns. Why, I have got it after all, she said. Here's the money. Now, let's have the monkey. The dealer looked hard at the money, but he made haste to put it in his pocket. I only hope you come by it honest, he said, shrugging his shoulders. He scratched his ear again. Well, he said, I suppose I must let you have it, but it's worth triple the money, so it is. He slowly led the way out to the hutch, opened the door gingerly, and made a sudden, fierce grab at the Psammead, which the Psammead acknowledged in one last, long, lingering bite. Here, take the brute, said the shopman, squeezing the Psammead so tight that he nearly choked it. It's bit me to the marrow, it have. The man's eyes opened as Anthea held out her arms. Don't blame me if it tears your face off its bones, he said, and the Psammead made a leap from his dirty, hard hands, and Anthea caught it in hers, which were not very clean, certainly, but at any rate were soft and pink, and held it kindly and closely. But you can't take it home like that, Cyril said. We shall have a crowd after us, and indeed 2 errand boys and a policeman had already collected. I can't give you nothing, only a paper bag like what we put tortoises in, said the man grudgingly. So the whole party went into the shop, and the shopman's eyes nearly came out of his head when, having given Anthea the largest paper bag he could find, he saw her hold it open, and the Psammead carefully crept into it. "Well," he said, "if that there don't beat cockfighting, but perhaps you've met the brute afore." "Yes," said Cyril affably, "he's an old friend of ours." "If I'd have known that," the man rejoined, "you wouldn't have had him under twice the money. However," he added as the children disappeared, "I ain't done so bad, seeing as I only give 5 bob for the beast, but then there's the bites to take into account." The children, trembling in agitation and excitement, carried home the Psammead, trembling in its paper bag. When they got home, Anthea nursed it and stroked it, and would have cried over it if she hadn't remembered how it hated to be wet. When it recovered enough to speak, it said, "Give me sand, silver sand from the oil, and colour shop from the oil and colour shop." I'm guessing the story's going to explain that because I don't know. "And get me plenty." They got the sand and put it and the Psammead in the round bath together, and it rubbed itself and rolled itself and shook itself and scraped itself and scratched itself and preened itself till it felt clean and comfy, and then it scrabbled a hasty hole in the sand and went to sleep in it. Silver sand is a particular sort, because I didn't know this, because our sand in New Zealand comes from the sea, but this is where, remember I talked about the green sand way? It's because there's an area of sand which is to do with the South Downs and the North Downs. I did explain that. And it's so they dig sand, like from sand pits, out of the ground. The sand has stuff in it, like mud and dirt and things, because it has been sitting under the sea and had things die in it and stuff a very, very, very long time ago. But it stains things. So if you have children and there's a builder's pile of sand out beside the street, the builders will say to you, "Don't let your children play in it. Their clothes will get stained." Because the clay that's mixed into the sand, just because of it having been dug out of the ground, stains things. So I'm guessing that silver sand is actually a type of sand that doesn't have anything like that. I don't know if it's originally sea sand, but it's a type of sand that would be clean. It will not have all of that stuff in it. Let's see if it gives us anything, apart from it being the colour of a type of paint in New Zealand. Here you go, silver sand. Silver sand is a fine white sand used in gardening. It consists largely of quartz particles that are not coated with iron oxides. Iron oxides colour sand from yellows to rich browns. Silver sand is also used as a constituent of mortar for laying light-coloured pavers. So just there it was talking about iron oxides. So iron oxides are where iron ore has reacted with water and air and stuff, and it has oxidized, and we call that a form of that is what we call rust. And so that's partly, it's not just clay, I'd forgotten that, that's partly why your clothes get stained if you are a child playing in normal sand. So silver sand is stuff that doesn't have any of that in it at all. I don't know where it comes from. It doesn't say. Maybe that's something you can find out just for your own satisfaction. Sometimes it's quite good to actually look things up just to find out about things that you otherwise didn't know of. Yeah, it's quite good. Doing things like that helps you to stay fresh in your mind, continuing to learn, even if you're outside of school age, even if you're beyond secondary education, tertiary education, or whatever. It doesn't actually matter, because if you keep learning about stuff, it keeps your mind fresh and it keeps stretching your ability to think. Anyway, we'll carry on. So the Psammead has been bathing in the sand. And we'll carry on. It goes to sleep in there too. The children hid the bath under the girl's bed and had supper. Old Nurse had got them a lovely supper of bread and butter and fried onions. She was full of kind and delicate thoughts. When Anthea woke the next morning, the Psammead was snuggling down between her shoulder and Jane's. So obviously they're sharing a bed, which used to be quite common because beds were quite expensive. And if you've got small children and a bigger bed, why waste room space by having lots of beds when you can have them all in one bed? So the girls shared a bed. So it was snuggling down in the bed between them. "You have saved my life," it said. "I know that man would have thrown cold water on me sooner or later, and then I should have died. I saw him wash out a guinea pig's hutch yesterday morning. I'm still frightfully sleepy. I think I'll go back to sand for another nap. Wake the boys and this dormouse of a Jane, and when you've had your breakfasts, we'll have a talk." "Don't you want any breakfast?" asked Anthea. "I dare say I shall pick a bit presently," it said, "but sand is all I care about. It's meat and drink to me, and coals and fire, and wife and children." With these words it clambered down by the bedclothes and scrambled back into the bath, where they heard it scratching itself out of sight. It burrows down in. So it can't be very big if it's able to hide itself under the sand in a round bathtub, one of those tin bathtubs, and if it had to use the bedclothes, the blankets, to get down to the floor. "Well," said Anthea, "anyhow, our holidays won't be dull now. We've found the Psammead again." "No," said Jane, beginning to pull on her stockings, "we shan't be dull, but it'll only be like having a pet dog now it can't give us wishes." "Oh, don't be so discontented," said Anthea. "If it can't do anything else, it can tell us about megatheriums and things," because that was part of what it used to talk about from its memory of being in prehistoric times. It used to get, people would find it and wish for a megatherium. It would save them having to go fishing to get food. There you go. So that's the end of chapter 1. We haven't yet found the amulet that the story is named after. Will we find it? I'll give you a clue. Chapter 2 is called The Half Amulet. We will be finding out about it. But now, since it's nearly 4:30 here in New Zealand, I'm going to stop reading because my voice is getting a little tired and I want to finish my coffee and have my peanuts and things like that, and finish uploading my other stories over to YouTube and do some fiddling around with my overlays and all those wonderful things that you can do on computers, as well as things that aren't on computers. Anyway, so thank you very much for being here and listening and hearing me natter on about so many strange things. Usually not quite as bad as that, not quite as disconnected as that, but often it's a little bit like that when we start a new story, because we haven't yet got into the flow of what's happening and wanting to find out what happens next. So there you go. Is that going to work? Nope, that one doesn't do anything. That one does. So if you want to get into conversation with me or any of the others, other than not specifically the Codex people, but any of the others who I know who are interested in children's stories and stuff like that, it's a very, very quiet one, but you're welcome to join our Discord server. Very occasionally I will remember to post illustrations from a story. There are some of the ones that we've had so far are over there, but also we can discuss stories that we've read, what we're currently reading. If you've got ideas about what's going to happen and you want to just sort of put the theory out there, or things that you found out about to do with the current story that we're reading, or books that you think that would be a really cool thing to read, you can join the Discord server, my Discord server, and actually be part of that conversation. That's a great way to keep in touch and find out a little bit more about it. So I'm also going to give you my other links, which is YouTube, because some of you weren't here when that went up into chat before. So that's my YouTube channel. You can go there and listen to the other stories, the first 2 books of this trilogy. So that is 5 Children in It and The Phoenix and the Carpet. So that's a good place to go. If you've got time and you want more stories to listen to, and you don't mind if they're recorded, then go to my YouTube channel, go to the playlists page and look for 5 Children and It and The Phoenix and the Carpet, those 2. And then you'll be up to date with who these children are and the sort of adventures they've had before. They've had some rather hair-raising ones, quite unique in their own way. Anyway, so thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for contributing as well. And I look forward to seeing you next time when we find out about this actual amulet that our book is named after. Ooh, are we going to have wishes involved? I think we will, because so far all the other 2 books in the series have had wishes as a common theme to them. Anyway, so come back on Monday if you want to be hearing me live. At the moment it's Friday for me, and it's now nearly 4:30 in the afternoon. I started talking to you at 3 o'clock in New Zealand. So if you look on my schedule on my Twitch page, it'll tell you when I'm going to next be live, unless of course something happens, in which case my apologies. I'm sorry I won't be able to make it, but usually I do. There's not often I don't. And I look forward to seeing you next time, and in the meantime, all weekend, for happy reading. Bye.